Maybe you've already realized there are things your avoidant partner will never admit, no matter how close you try to get. But beneath that silence, there are hidden truths. Truths you deserve to know. Truths that could completely change the way you feel about this relationship. If you're here right now, it's not by accident. It's time to understand what really goes on inside the mind of your avoidant partner. So what is it exactly that an avoidant partner will never admit, but you need to know? Your avoidant partner is terrified, deeply terrified, of intimacy. At first glance, this might seem strange or even unlikely. They often appear calm, independent, even indifferent. But underneath that calm exterior, there's a storm of anxiety and fear about becoming too close, too vulnerable. They won't admit this fear because acknowledging it would mean confronting their own emotional wounds, which they've spent a lifetime hiding. The quiet distance you feel isn't because your partner doesn't care. It's precisely because closeness feels unsafe to them. Real intimacy is their greatest fear, because it brings them face to face with vulnerability, something they've learned to avoid at all costs. Their fear of intimacy comes from experiences that shaped them long before you came into the picture, experiences they likely never talk about. Maybe they faced emotional neglect, or were taught early in life that expressing their needs only led to disappointment. So they built walls around their heart, walls that protect them, but also keep them trapped. When your partner pulls away, it can feel deeply personal, like a rejection or proof that you aren't good enough. But it's not about your worth or value. It's about their survival. They learned early on that distancing themselves was the safest way to avoid pain. Even today, closeness triggers an alarm deep within them, a subconscious warning that intimacy will inevitably lead to hurt or loss. So, they withdraw, not because they don't want love, but because they simply don't trust it. This hidden fear of intimacy creates confusing patterns. One day they're affectionate, the next they're distant. You never quite know where you stand, and the relationship starts to feel uncertain and exhausting. But understanding their hidden fear can help you realize something important. Their emotional distance isn't a reflection of you or your worth. It's a reflection of their own inner struggle. Knowing this doesn't make their behavior okay, nor does it mean you should tolerate endless cycles of distance and rejection. But it does offer clarity. With clarity comes power, the power to stop blaming yourself, to stop endlessly chasing closeness they can't offer, and to start taking steps toward emotional health and healing. What your avoidant partner will never admit is how deeply they're hurting beneath their silence. Now you know their hidden truth. Intimacy terrifies them, but that doesn't have to define you or your happiness anymore. Knowing that your avoidant partner fears intimacy might bring clarity, but there's another layer beneath that silence, something subtle yet deeply revealing. Your avoidant partner feels vulnerable, but masks it with distance. Understanding this dynamic is crucial because it clarifies the confusing dance of closeness followed by sudden withdrawal, a pattern you've likely experienced and struggled to decode. Think of distance as a protective cloak your partner wears daily, invisible but ever present. Rather than exposing wounds from the past, distance provides a safe haven, shielding their fragile sense of self from judgment or rejection. It's a paradox they live, craving love yet constantly fearing what it demands from them emotionally. They stand perpetually at arm's length, hoping to protect themselves from the imagined danger lurking in intimacy. Perhaps you've wondered why meaningful conversations often turn superficial, or why sincere attempts at closeness seem suddenly met by emotional detachment. This apparent coldness isn't indifference. It's a carefully rehearsed act, meticulously performed each time vulnerability threatens to surface. Their true selves remain hidden, guarded fiercely beneath layers of carefully crafted emotional distance. What makes this distance so compelling to your avoidant partner is its apparent security. If closeness feels risky, distance feels certain. Each withdrawal, every unreturned call or message left unanswered, is not about creating pain. It's about reclaiming a sense of control. For someone who learned early in life that closeness can wound, maintaining distance is survival. Their emotional armor isn't personal, it's instinctual, a habit formed long before you entered their life. Yet there's something crucial hidden beneath their coldness, a quiet longing to be truly seen and accepted. Beneath the facade of independence lies a subtle whisper of insecurity, a fear of being unworthy of love or affection. But acknowledging that vulnerability is unthinkable. It risks the very exposure they've spent their entire life avoiding. Thus, distance becomes their greatest ally, the most reliable protection against emotional harm. In your own confusion, you've probably tried countless ways to bridge that gap, to reach through their defenses, hoping that patience or love could soften their walls. Yet every effort seems to push them further away. The harder you chase, the faster they retreat, not because they want to escape you, but because closeness intensifies their fear of exposure. Your partner isn't running from you, they're running from their own inner fragility, terrified of what might happen if someone were to glimpse their hidden vulnerability. It's crucial to recognize that the emotional barriers they've built aren't yours to dismantle. While it's tempting to believe that love alone can conquer their distance, the reality is more sobering. Those barriers exist for reasons deeply embedded in their emotional landscape. Understanding this provides you with a new perspective, one less burdened by confusion or frustration, and more grounded in empathy and realistic expectations. Seeing clearly behind their mask allows you to redefine your own approach. No longer must you feel responsible for bridging every emotional gap they create. Recognizing that their distance masks vulnerability is a transformative insight. It frees you from endless cycles of self-blame and frustration, helping you step back with newfound clarity and emotional independence. This realization doesn't simplify your journey. Instead, it illuminates it. It places the power of understanding squarely in your hands, reminding you gently that emotional connection can't thrive without mutual willingness and courage. Your partner's struggle with vulnerability is theirs to face, but your choice, how you respond, how you care for yourself emotionally, belongs entirely to you. Understanding your partner's vulnerability, hidden beneath their emotional distance, is just the beginning. If you go deeper, there's an even more powerful truth that remains unseen. Your avoidant partner secretly struggles with the pain of never feeling enough, and this shapes their behavior in ways you've likely sensed but never fully understood. Imagine carrying a silent, invisible weight wherever you go, a sense that something within you is always lacking. This feeling follows your partner like a shadow, influencing every interaction and decision they make. They live with a quiet fear that who they truly are is inadequate, undeserving of genuine love and acceptance. To protect themselves from this feeling, they keep their distance, hoping no one sees their true self clearly enough to reject it. You may have noticed how compliments or affection seem difficult for them to accept. Even your sincere expressions of love might be met with awkward silence or deflection. This isn't because they don't value your words, it's because believing those words requires them to trust something that feels deeply unfamiliar, being seen as worthy exactly as they are. Their emotional avoidance isn't rejection aimed at you, it's a defense against experiencing further disappointment or judgment. From the outside, this struggle can appear confusing, even contradictory. How can someone so strong and independent quietly doubt their own value? Yet beneath their composed exterior lies an inner critic whispering reminders of flaws and shortcomings, creating a narrative where love feels conditional and acceptance feels fleeting. They become convinced that eventually you'll notice these imagined inadequacies and withdraw your love. And to avoid that pain, they withdraw first. When conflict arises or intimacy becomes intense, You've likely observed sudden shifts in their behavior. Perhaps they become defensive or critical, creating distance that seems unjustified. These reactions aren't random. They're signs of an inner panic, a fear that their insecurities have been exposed. Their withdrawal isn't about avoiding love. It's about avoiding the risk of confirming their deepest fears about themselves. Your partner's silence about this internal struggle doesn't make it less real. It grows stronger, feeding on shame and secrecy. Opening up about these feelings would mean acknowledging vulnerability, something they've learned to avoid at all costs. So they choose distance instead of closeness, control instead of vulnerability, all to mask this hidden pain of inadequacy. If you've ever blamed yourself for their emotional distance, wondering if you weren't good enough to inspire their love, understand this clearly. This internal conflict existed long before you entered their life. It isn't yours to fix or carry. Their struggle with feeling inadequate isn't caused by your actions or lack of effort. It's rooted deeply within their own emotional history. Recognizing this pain helps you step away from self-blame and confusion. It allows you to see your partner's emotional distancing not as rejection, but as the result of an unresolved internal battle. You can't heal this pain for them. You can only acknowledge its presence, understand how it influences their behavior, and choose how you will respond to it. Recognizing your partner's hidden feeling of inadequacy helps unravel the puzzle of their behavior, but there's still more beneath the surface. The independence you've seen, sometimes admirable, sometimes hurtful, isn't what it appears. Your partner's fierce need for independence isn't rejection, it's survival. For your avoidant partner, independence isn't simply a choice. It's a way of navigating the emotional landscape they've inherited. Think of it as their emotional compass, pointing constantly towards safety. Independence keeps them away from the overwhelming fear that closeness will lead to disappointment or pain. This need for self-sufficiency isn't a judgment about you or your worth. It's a defense mechanism developed long ago, a strategy deeply embedded in their emotional blueprint. You've probably felt confused or even wounded when they insist on doing things alone or maintain boundaries that feel unnecessarily rigid. They may handle crises without involving you or brush off your support during tough times. This can feel personal, as though they're purposefully excluding you. But their behavior isn't about pushing you away. It's about reinforcing the security of being emotionally unattached. Independence reassures them they won't lose themselves or become dependent on someone whose affection might vanish unexpectedly. This pattern often leaves you wondering why your partner insists so firmly on staying emotionally separate, even in moments when support would be comforting. But consider this. Independence is their emotional refuge. It's the safest place they know. For them, leaning on another person feels risky, almost reckless. Trusting you, or anyone else, with their emotional needs threatens the very foundation of safety they've painstakingly built. Independence is their sanctuary, a predictable place free from vulnerability. In their world, relying on someone else feels like gambling with emotional stability. It's not just uncomfortable, it feels dangerous. Your partner learned early in life that depending on others could lead to profound emotional pain. Perhaps they grew up in environments where trust was repeatedly broken, or emotional support was consistently unreliable. Over time, independence became synonymous with safety, and emotional closeness turned into a threat. You've likely encountered moments where your partner chooses solitude at the precise moment you'd expect them to seek connection. They might prefer silence to conversation, retreating inward when faced with emotional challenges. These are not random choices. They're calculated efforts to remain emotionally insulated. Each moment of solitude strengthens their internal sense of security, providing proof they don't need anyone else to manage their emotions. Seeing independence as survival rather than rejection shifts your perception. The boundaries they build are not personal barriers meant to keep you out, but rather essential structures they've constructed to protect themselves from pain. They operate from a deep-seated belief that to rely emotionally on someone else is to risk their own stability, a risk they've decided is too high. This recognition doesn't erase the hurt or frustration you may feel when your partner withdraws, but it does offer understanding. It illuminates why your sincere attempts at closeness sometimes provoke resistance, and why independence feels like such an integral part of their emotional identity. Seeing your partner's independence as a form of emotional survival clarifies much of what felt confusing or personal before. Yet beneath their insistence on distance lies a contradiction even more complex. Your avoidant partner is longing for love, trapped in distrust. This hidden conflict explains why moments of genuine affection can quickly dissolve into tension or uncertainty. Think about the times you've noticed their gaze soften briefly, or sensed warmth breaking through their typically guarded demeanor. Those fleeting moments reveal an undeniable desire for connection. Yet, almost as quickly, a shadow returns, an instinctive mistrust that whispers caution into their thoughts. This mistrust didn't appear overnight. It was formed slowly, through past disappointments and betrayals, making the very idea of love feel like a threat. Imagine trying to reach for something beautiful, something you've dreamed of having, yet every time you get close, fear grips your heart. This is your avoidant partner's reality. Love feels simultaneously irresistible and perilous. Each step closer increases the risk of getting hurt again. Their heart remembers all too vividly what it means to trust and be let down. So they hover at the edge, close enough to glimpse intimacy's promise, yet distant enough to feel safe from emotional harm. Often their hesitation appears as inconsistent behavior, expressing deep care one day and retreating emotionally the next. These patterns can feel confusing or even cruel, making you question your own perceptions. But inconsistency isn't meant to manipulate. It reflects their internal struggle, torn between the yearning for closeness and the fear of disappointment. Their heart reaches forward, while their mind pulls back sharply, creating the painful seesaw of emotional connection you've experienced. This internal battle reveals itself clearly in their actions rather than words. Your partner may rarely speak openly about their desire for closeness, because admitting such feelings would expose their vulnerability. Instead, they quietly communicate through subtle gestures, an unexpected moment of tenderness, or a rare, unguarded smile. These signals, though brief, confirm their longing is real. But trust remains elusive, trapped behind a lifetime of defenses built to prevent emotional devastation. Your attempts to nurture intimacy might paradoxically trigger their deepest insecurities. When your love becomes evident, their anxiety heightens, activating old wounds. They've learned to associate emotional openness with pain and loss. Love, therefore, becomes something they crave, yet instinctively distrust, leaving them suspended between hope and fear, unable to fully embrace either. Perhaps you've sensed that your partner wants something meaningful, something deep and genuine, but each step forward feels followed by 2 steps backward. It's as though they're navigating an emotional labyrinth, uncertain how to find their way out. The distrust they harbor isn't aimed at you specifically. Rather, it's deeply embedded in their emotional core. Each emotional connection awakens the same nagging doubts, keeping them locked in a cycle of cautious hope followed by withdrawal. Recognizing your partner's longing for love paired with this intense distrust doesn't simplify your relationship. It deepens your understanding, providing clarity about why your sincere efforts seem to push them further away. Their hesitation isn't rejection. It's the painful consequence of internal beliefs shaped by past wounds. Understanding your partner's conflict, this complicated dance between longing for closeness and resisting it, leads you to face another important reality. You can't untangle their emotional knots. The transformation comes from within, both for them and, perhaps even more crucially, for yourself. Every effort you've made to change them, every gesture intended to bridge their emotional gaps, has likely brought you back to the same familiar place, frustration or disappointment. The reason isn't lack of love or effort on your part. The uncomfortable reality is that lasting emotional shifts are never something one person can force upon another. Genuine change grows internally, cultivated in quiet moments, when the person themselves decides they're ready to face the discomfort they've long avoided. Consider that true emotional growth doesn't happen when you urge someone toward healing. Instead, it blooms quietly, sometimes unnoticed even by the person experiencing it. Your avoidant partner, locked within their own emotional fortress, must first recognize that their walls no longer protect them, but imprison them. Without this personal insight, any attempt to guide them toward intimacy only strengthens their resistance, reinforcing the very barriers you're trying to dismantle. Yet this realization doesn't leave you powerless. On the contrary, it offers a deeper understanding of your own emotional journey. If their transformation is outside your control, your transformation isn't. The key is turning inward, exploring your own reasons for persisting in a relationship defined by emotional distance. It's about discovering why closeness to someone who resists emotional openness became your personal quest, your measure of self-worth. Ask yourself honestly, what deeper need does this relationship fulfill within you? Often, relationships become mirrors, reflecting unresolved emotional wounds or unmet needs from your own past. Perhaps there's an unconscious desire to rewrite old narratives, proving to yourself you're capable of securing love from someone emotionally unavailable. This awareness, though initially uncomfortable, empowers you to begin genuine self-healing, independent of your partner's emotional choices. Imagine standing before a doorway that only opens from the inside. No matter how persistently you knock or plead, the door stays shut. That door represents your partner's emotional boundaries, and no amount of effort from your side will open it. Your energy and compassion, therefore, become better invested in exploring your own emotional landscape. It's about recognizing the limits of your influence and choosing consciously to reclaim your emotional independence. When you turn your attention toward your own emotional transformation, you shift the focus from changing someone else to understanding yourself more deeply. Emotional freedom isn't achieved by persuading your partner to change. It comes from releasing the need to control outcomes. Your journey toward emotional healing starts the moment you decide that your happiness won't depend on someone else's emotional readiness. In reclaiming your emotional autonomy, you stop being defined by someone else's capacity for intimacy. You begin to see yourself clearly, not as someone waiting endlessly outside another's emotional walls, but as someone fully capable of building emotional strength, independent of external validation or reassurance. If this video resonated with you, consider subscribing to the channel for more insights and emotional clarity. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below sharing which hidden truth about your avoidant partner surprised you the most. Your experience matters, and your insights could help someone else facing the same challenges. Thank you so much for watching and sharing your thoughts. I'll see you in the next video.